So, Richard Thieme is an author and professional speaker focused on the deeper implications of technology, religion, and science for the 21st century. He does his best to address some of the challenges posed by new technologies in the future, how to redesign themselves, how to meet these challenges, and creativity in response to radical change. He speaks to the human in the machine technology related to security and intelligence issues as they come home to our humanity. He takes the word spirituality seriously and thinks it means what works, what really works for an optimal outcome for us flawed human beings. By implication, it refers to what works for the planet too. He believes as we grow older, our circle of interest gets larger and larger. He refers to himself as a silverback, a genuine silverback. Silverbacks find themselves so tuned to younger people that their triumphs are the younger people's triumphs are the silverbacks' triumphs. They rejoice in contributing to others because they're an organic unity and they feel that they sense it, experience it, and more deeply than ever. They are contributing less to their own projects and more, if they can, to the projects of others. They know their limits but want to make a difference. And as George Bernard Shaw said, they want to be all used up when they die. So I think this is his first time here presenting in Minnesota MUFON, but I'm really excited to have him. We've talked about him for a while. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big Minnesota MUFON welcome to Mr. Richard Thieme.
For those who can't see it, this is a very small, very intimate group. And so I'm going to be conversing with you on that level. And I'm going to have kind of two parts. I mean, let's see, it's 3:20. We'll have maximum an hour with Q&A. Won't get home before dark, not with 4:30 sunset. And I've got two parts of this that I want to present. And I have books related to each part, of course. And I'll tell you what the best deal is because you won't believe it. This incredible volume is called UFOs and Government, A Historical Inquiry. My name is on it. The main writers are Michael Swords, Robert Powell. You might have, know Jan Aldrich, Barry Greenwood, Klaus Svan, Chalker in Australia. We spent 5 years putting this book together. After that whole team, especially those top guys, spent 50 years amassing documents. And every single citation, and there are nearly 1,000 footnotes in the book, point to a government document or primary source. So there is nothing speculative. And what this book does is illuminate how the government, especially ours, but also with other chapters on France and Australia and Sweden and so on, how the government responded to UFO phenomena from the 1940s to the 1980s, and it's in their own words. So the book is considered the gold standard in historical research into the depths and details of UFO phenomena over that period of time, more than half a century. And as a result of that judgment, it is in over 100 university libraries in the country. So it's a great book. In 1978, I was serving in my first parish, a little place in Clearfield, Utah, that gathered people from North Davis County in Utah. If you know Utah, you know that the Episcopal Church is about 0.5% of the people, and that's a literal fact. And it was on the edge of Hill Air Force Base. And Hill Air Force Base was a very select place. I remember a time when I was driving to work in the morning and I felt, you can feel it, I felt something up here. It's the way some people say they felt a UFO when it was appearing. And I pulled over to the side of the road and I looked up, and what I had felt was the immense presence, maybe the electromagnetic signature, I don't know. But there was the space shuttle on the back of a 747 coming in for its final approach at Hill Air Force Base, which was not announced that was a stopover on the way back to the East Coast. But I also had people from that base, Hill Air Force Base, in the parish. They kind of lined up to serve the parish according to their rank, which civilians thought was pretty funny. Colonel, captain, lieutenant, senior warden, junior warden, vestryman. But the senior warden was a terrific fighter pilot, and he really had the right stuff. His name was Bob Reed, and he was heavily decorated for heroic actions that he had done in Vietnam, and they're the kind of thing I doubt that I would have done. He went back in to get people out, and he got them out. And, He was a cocky guy, cowboy hat, flak jacket, cowboy boots. He'd walk in and everybody would kind of gather around him because he had authority. And I'm trying to say he had the right stuff. He was a terrific guy. And we were sitting in that church basement in 1978. And I said, Bob, you know, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the film is in the multiplex down in Ogden. I've read a bit about UFOs. Um, what's the story? I said, I read you guys chase these things in your fastest fighters and can't catch them. Now, as I say, he was a cocky guy, and he always had kind of a little cocky smirk, but that wasn't what was on his face when he answered. He had a very serious and perplexed look. And he said, well, that's the story, Richard. We chase them and we can't catch them. Now, I'd read about them, but you know, when you read horror stories or you read science fiction or fantasy, you kind of enjoy entering into the world that's depicted, but you don't take it at face value. Well, that's kind of the way a lot of people read about UFOs then, because we didn't know. But for me, that was an eye opener. I said to this person who I knew well and who had absolute credibility, are you telling me they're real and they represent a technology so superior to ours that we can't match it? And he said, that's what I'm telling you. And he told another story or two, commonplace in the lore now. And I made a decision that I was going to try to find out what was real about that. Now, the best way you do that, I had degrees, as I said, good degrees from Northwestern, a bachelor's with honors in University of Chicago. And I went back to seminary, had a 3-year degree there with honors. I had a brain. I had to, because I had no practical skills whatsoever. You know, people say, how did you get into professional speaking? And that's the answer, because I have no skills. So I learned to use words. But then you discover you can use them to advantage, not just for your advantage, but for plumbing the depths of meaning as much as a language can point to it. It's like a forked twig in the hands of a dowser. It can tell you where the water is, but then you have to go dig to find the water. You have to do the research. And I did know how to do the research, but I also knew that there, as I studied the field and talked to people who had experiences that they gave to me. I was a state director of MUFON next door in Wisconsin for a while. And I used that above all to have meetings and gather stories and interview people so that I could have a firsthand experience, which I certainly had in the ministry, of evaluating the affect. Like if someone presents a story to you and you have lots of experience, as I did by then, of understanding, are they telling the truth as they know it? You can't always get at the truth, but you can get at the truth as they know it. Do they know what they're saying? Do they think they're saying it? And I used the position to do that. And there were enough interviews that had really hit pay dirt to more and more advance my understanding that, as Bob Reed said, yeah, this is real. This is real. And it got more and more complex and more difficult to explore. And I upped my game, by which I mean I tried to engage with the very best people I knew in the area. And Mike Swords, the top writer there, and Robert Powell, you can't beat them. Swords has written some of the very best articles on UFOs through CUFOS and its journal. He's a professor, retired now, professor of science from Western Michigan University. And Robert is still going. He has a new book coming out in April because he's a scientist. He was the head of the chemistry department at AMD, the semiconductor manufacturer, advanced degrees, but more than that, the intuition of a top scientist, which requires you to be able to see other domains, cross-disciplinary areas that you can integrate with the science that you're doing, and he knows how to do that. He's got a book coming out in April. I believe it's called A Scientist Talks About UFOs. What we know, or what we can know, and what we don't. I think it's what we know and what we don't know. And he's very clear on the distinction, but he would agree with me, I think, and so would Mike, that what we know is that the technology is not terrestrial. And we know, if we'll look at some of these slides to just enhance that point of view, we know that we've known that since the late 1940s. And we know that we made a decision in the early 1950s to shut it down for the public for reasons of national security. The question still raises itself, and I raise this with the topmost people I can reach. What are the key security issues that UFO phenomena challenge us with? And if I had a simple answer and clear answer to that, I would give it to you. I can speculate. There are a lot of good reasons why it constitutes a security threat, as I believe the highest ranking people in our government know it is. But if nothing else, we can't afford to let anybody else get a hold of the technology and figure it out and understand it and use it before we do, because then they own us. They own the planet. As indeed, the extraterrestrial presence could own the planet in that political or economic or social way, but chooses not to and has chosen not to for all these many decades that it's been showing up. So I wanted to know, I reached a point where I couldn't learn anymore on my own doing the exploration I did and reading and reading and reading and separating the wheat from the chaff, a lot of chaff in this area, right? And I called Mike, who lived in Kalamazoo, and I was in Milwaukee, and said, what do you guys know that I don't know? And this is why you love a guy, right? When they show up as a mentor. He came from Kalamazoo to Chicago and sat for a full weekend giving me a private seminar in whatever I wanted to know or ask about the phenomena that CUFOS, at that time and still maybe one of the best organized non-government structures ever since Hynek started it in 1973, I believe it was. He told me everything I asked. He answered all questions fully and fairly. And the bottom line was, well, there wasn't a great deal. There weren't secrets. There weren't secrets that the best researchers in the field knew about what was happening that I didn't know, or more precisely, that I couldn't infer and determine from years of study. Because I say 1978, that's 45 years about that I have been obsessive in pursuit of the truth. Because as with the ministry, as with literature, I'm a need-to-know machine. I want to know as much as humanly possible about what's real and what's real on our planet. And above all, who appointed themselves guardians of the truth and factuality that they think they have a God-given right to prevent us from knowing what's happening on our planet. Well, all of the best efforts at doing the research are using a lot of the data that I'm sure many of you know. It's in the public domain, and a guy named David Marler's just got all the last cases from APRO, Coral Lorenzen's organization at the beginning of the UFO wave. And what Mike and Robert and Marler and Barry and Jan and others are doing, and Mark Rodiger, who is still head of CUFOS, are doing is everything they can to digitize and make available in archives all of the cases, all of the material from that time on, from the 40s on, which we used most of that we had for that extraordinary book, but which is available to all researchers when it's compiled and fully accessible, because the goal is to let everyone who can do research do it. And there's another goal, which is easy to achieve. As Mike says, read the cases. And he says, read the cases. And then he says again, read the cases. I have read how many? You probably have read many, many cases yourselves. And I mean the credible cases, the legitimate cases. I've talked to people all over Wisconsin when I was there who would still tell stories like, oh, a banker in Brown Deer, Wisconsin. And I remember going to his desk on the corner of Port Washington Road and Brown Deer Road. I said, I understand something happened where you were growing up in Antigo, Wisconsin, up north. Subsequently toured the cheese factory up there, and their Parmesan is as good as anybody's. And this is the story he told. He said, yeah, we had a farm in Antigo, and one night this glowing lighted object came across the sky and it landed behind our barn. And we went out to the road, and here came a trooper or a policeman, I don't know if it was local or state, and he'd been following it across town, and he pulled up, and the banker says, well, are you going to go back there? And he says, I'm not going back there. You going back there? No, I'm not going back there. So neither of them went back there. But the next morning, they went back there, and there was the classic circle, burned edges of leaves and branches, a circle on the ground. And this, he says, this is what nobody in Antigo who was there then has ever forgotten. He says, you know much about cows? I said, no. I got a brother who's as close as I will get, but no. And he said, well, cows know about barbed wire. They're not stupid animals, and they don't fool with it. But something so scared the cattle that were back there that they all piled through the barbed wire and tore themselves to bits. And they had to put down the whole herd. And nothing like that has ever happened before or since. Now, does that prove there was a UFO? No. Does it prove the cattle were scared out of their udders? Yes. Those are the kind of stories you got from people, told with appropriate affect, with no agenda, with no need for publicity, no desire for it. And those stories, if you investigate on your own, multiply not by the dozens or the hundreds, but by the thousands. And in our archives of good cases, it is impossible to read the good cases and see how often the details are replicated time and time and time again. As Alan Hynek said, you get to a point where you can't believe everybody is a liar or hallucinating. We have to deal with what's happening. The effectiveness of the debunking is that Alan Hynek, after all those years, me after all those years, many of us after all those years are still fighting that resistance, still fighting almost to believe that it's real. Because still, when you turn on the TV, now there's more revelation from select observers, witnesses, military personnel than ever. But it's also coupled on the news with a debunker. They call him a skeptic, but he's not a skeptic. An atheist is not a skeptic. An atheist is a true believer in no, as much as a religious person is a true believer in yes. And so what does it take? Well, this speaks to the depth and the hold it has on us of the belief that we are special, that we are the top of the food chain, that the planet was made for us, that God loves us, not more, but exclusively, because we're the apple of God's eye. And the presence of extraterrestrials posits a different scenario, which is that there are a lot of apples on the tree. And some of us, when we found out our parents loved our siblings as much as us, were shocked and hurt. And it's the same kind of thing. We've got stories and lore reinforced by many religions that God made Earth for us to dominate and loves us best. We are the apple of God's eye. But as I say, lots of apples on the tree. And I'll show you some things here that would confront any reasonable, rational person, I think, with the impossibility that we alone are intelligent, not least of which is the data that has accrued over 75 years since 1947 and the Kenneth Arnold episode near Seattle when he reported 9 discs flying in formation. You have a question?
Yes. You personally think that you have found the truth?
Well, there's some words in there that I wouldn't use quite that way. One is you, the other is truth. I'll talk in a minute about the other part of it, which is my participation in security and intelligence work, and what the IT revolution has done to people, and that's transformed what it is, what identity means. AI is going to do it even more. We, 10 years ago, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have the We can talk about that later if you want. It's a subsection of the conversation. But when you say the truth, I don't think there is the truth. I think there are facts, and I think we can infer things from facts. But do I know the ultimate or rock bottom truth of the universe? I was not there when it was made. And if you believe the story, God would pull me up by the shirt and say, can you make a goddamn crocodile? Huh? Can you make an emu? And I would have to say, well, no, I can't do any of that. And he would say, then shut up. He would probably, I can't say it if it's going to be broadcast. He would say, shut the blank up. Because you don't really know what the truth is. And the bottom line, when I look at, I'll show you some of these slides, they just confront us with the fact that the universe is, as character says in my third book there, so much more mysterious, scary mysterious than we ever thought. And these are people working inside the fence. Now, that might be a good time to segue to that and tell you how I got to that point, because it's a good question. But all I can do as an answer is say, no, I'm a learner. A fourth grader is in fourth grade. I may be in 12th grade, but I'm not doing advanced graduate work in life and reality at a level that enables me to have the arrogance or the craziness to suggest that I do. But I do know that lifelong study of any subject with diligence, with compatriots like those guys that I mentioned, with consulting the very best in the field, letting them nuance and inflect and inform your exploration, and doing the work and doing the work and doing the work and reading the cases, you probably know a lot more about it than a lot of people. But the ultimate truth, and this is in book 3 as one of the main pursuits of the people inside the group, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, is what do you know? And when did you know it? So all I can do is tell you some things I know. I know that extraterrestrial presence has taken the form of cultural intrusion into our culture for many, many years. And somebody asked me, well, what do you think is the motive? And nobody, no human, can say what the motive is. We can't say it, for a dolphin or a bat, much less for an alien from somewhere else who is deeply grounded in society and culture that may be thousands of years older than anything we can imagine. So what we do know is that aliens are alien. And if there has been communication from them, there's only one form I can identify that makes sense to me, which is not landing on the White House lawn. Can you imagine, depending on which president you had? Can you imagine? I'm not going to get into that stuff, but you try to imagine an alien talking to one of our presidents who might be an alien, him or herself. That's not the way it's going to be done. How is it going to be done? The way it has been done. And the way NASA said they would do it if we encounter another civilization when we get really out there. We haven't in this part of the world, but we are still looking at Enceladus and Europa for life, and we're looking at Mars for life, Titan maybe, but this is not life at the level that we're talking about. So what do we know has been communicated? Well, I mentioned Kenneth Arnold, who saw this stuff in 47. He told people what he saw. People, you go back to Charles Fort and ship's diaries, letters, ship's logs, and so on. And there are other descriptions which sound very much like UFO descriptions from the 19th and even the 18th century. So it probably didn't start in 1947, but that's a benchmark for when the modern era of UFOs began. And so from 1947 forward, what has happened in these many 75 years or so? UFOs have shown themselves, have manifested their presence in hundreds, thousands of places all over the earth Every country reports the phenomena. Every single country. People still say, how come they're only in America? They're not. Every single country has this phenomena occurring. And it's often in obscure places or late at night or to a few people. If they wanted to show up at the Super Bowl and land at halftime and kick Beyonce off the platform, they could do it. But they don't. So what is the result of showing up that way? Everybody, if I asked you to draw a UFO, you know what you draw, right? Might not be the only kind, but you draw a disc. And if I asked you to draw an alien, you know what you do. Big head and big black eyes set over at the side, a little tiny nose like mine, and little lip maybe, or something, and an orifice. In other words, everybody in the culture knows what, quote, a UFO and an alien looks like. Whether it's accurate and complete or not is not the question. It's that they have manifested themselves over many decades in such a way that we know, as a friend at NSA said to me, Richard, they're here. They're here. And why did he say that? Well, people came to the fort, to NSA, to take his course. And if they were present at a military base or some other site where he knew an event had taken place, he would question them about it. And he had a nice folder of his own investigation with all these people privately who came to him as an NSA officer. And so when he says, they're here, they're here, I pay attention. But I don't need his testimony. He's just one more of many who knows they have been here. But he also told another story, and he said, I don't know if that's true, because, you know, and I said, it's pretty far out. He says, well, let me tell you the story, and you do with it what you want. He said he had a friend at the base and military base, and he was at the bar after hours, and he was standing next to another guy at the bar, and the guy says to him, you know, I'm getting pretty tired of this life. And the one he knows says, well, yeah, we all are. He says, well, I think I'm getting ready to go. He says, well, he said, we all feel that way, but we can't just AWOL, you know. And the guy says, no, it's time for me to go. And he says, well, where are you going to go? Where's home? And the guy went like that. And that's when he looked at him, peered into his face, and saw that his eyes, cue the music, had a deep orange glow. End of story. Okay, so I have a folder called Agnostic, and I have a lot of stories like that, and they're great fodder for fiction and stories that I write. But is that a true story? Did he really behold what we call in the lore a walk-in? Did he behold a person who came from one of the species who so resembled our own that he could penetrate our society as an undercover agent? I don't know. They're great stories. I don't know. And to your question, I don't think I will ever know the answer to those perplexing questions. They titillate, they tease, some may be true, but I also know that the disinformation that has followed this phenomena from 1953 on, and the Robertson panel and all subsequent policy direction in that way, has prevented us from getting at the simple truth, because it matters to somebody. And I say somebody, not some conspiracy theorist, top of the pinnacle, top of the pyramid person, because there is no control. You know, that's really the problem. People who do conspiracy theories think there's a group in control. There isn't. That's the conflicted part. We don't know. It's a chaotic system, in the best sense of the word. So we don't know. Question? Yeah.
Yeah, for me at least, it just comes down for constant black and white situation. We're at a meeting like this, I think, because we're curious and investigative. The question has always been asked, if they're true, why are they here? But I think the question should be, why are we here?
Well, that's a good question. And when I was in the Episcopal Church as a clergyman, I was supposed to give the off-the-shelf answer. but I can't do that anymore. I don't do that anymore. And I don't know. Again, I don't know. And I've learned that just say, I don't know a lot when you don't know. Don't pretend you know anything. And I don't know any of the answers to those big questions. But let me use that again, good question, to segue into how I got here and how I got to these books, the Mobius Trilogy. I was a clergyman. I was pretty good at it. And most of the time I loved it until I didn't. And the reason I didn't at the end was because I couldn't have a conversation with people inside the church structure about what was happening in technology. And I had gotten really excited about IT and the way it was transforming everything, because it was. And that started for me. I said I taught literature, playing games with my kid on an Apple, which I bought him when he was 12. He's 52 now. Taught me that interacting with a computer was different from interacting with a book. And as a professor of literature, I knew what text meant and how it meant it. And this was different. And I had an insight that, my God, I'm being changed, not just changed my brain or thinking, but I'm being fundamentally altered by interacting with a computer that is mediating meaning in a different way. And then the light bulb went on. And if that's true for me, it's going to be true for the whole society. So I start writing about that in a religious context. And the first thing I wrote was a long theological, it's still on the web, called Computer Applications for Spirituality, the Transformation of Religious Experience. I sent it to the Anglican Theological Review, our top journal, and they sent it back. And in the margin were nasty comments. Seriously, who does he think he is? This is insane. God forbid. I still have them. I love it. Because 10 years later, that journal said, may we please publish that? It is so cutting edge. And I said, it's not cutting edge anymore. And the examples I gave, anybody remember moos and mushes and primitive AI? They were obsolete. Technical people who read that said, well, yeah, but you got to update all that. That's old technology. But that didn't faze the religious people because they didn't update anything in their thinking of what was happening outside the fence of the enclave, which they called their religious system. And so I was being offered really good jobs as they go, Bishop of Connecticut and biggest church in the Episcopal system had come. And I'll never forget, they called up and they said, we just spent 3 days with you and you have everything we want in head of the church, rector. But there's one thing that nags us. I said, what's that? And he said, we all got the feeling that you don't want us. And I said, see, you don't want to let go of something that's working so well. But I said, bingo, I'm done. I don't want you. I don't want another parish. I don't want to be constrained by having to think in a narrow, small way just for golden handcuffs until I get a pension. And it's a pretty good pension. Trinity Boston had a 5-story Back Bay townhouse, that you lived in. I did ministry on Maui. We had a 5-bedroom house on the beach. We used to say we went there to do good, and we did really well, And unfortunately, it's gone. It was in Lahaina. It was on the beach. Our house was on the beach. The church was on the beach. Now it's a field of ashes. So that hurt. But I made the tough decision at the age of 49. I trusted my intuition, my insight. I said, I'm going to address these issues. And that was 1993. And the great thing about that year is that it was permitted to do commercial enterprise on the web, the internet, for the first time. Therefore, there were audiences all over the place who wanted to know what was going on. And I was asked to do a column on what I think the Wisconsin Professional Engineers called. And they said, we're hearing this word cyberspace. Can you write a column telling us what it is? So I said, yeah, I can do that. So I wrote a column, what is cyberspace? And they said, that was great. Our members loved it. Can you do another one and another and another? And pretty soon I was asking friends, this is all brand new. I had a new website. There were little tiny websites. I had email, new account, CompuServe, things like that. And I asked friends if they wanted to read these columns. They said, sure. So I started sending them out to a list of friends. And USA Today happened to find them and said it spotlighted my website as a website of the week. That's how few there were. Website of the week. And pretty soon I had a few hundred people. And then within a few years, I was sending this column called Islands in the Clickstream to thousands of people in 60 countries, and that established my credibility as a thinker with insight into the nature of the revolution and how it was transforming identity, society, culture, everything, all the way up to and including geopolitical structures and intelligence and security. And it was at that level that Jeff Moss said, sure, you can keynote DEF CON 4. There's only 300 people here. Worst could happen is they don't like you and you don't come back. But I did come back. Last year, I spoke there for the 26th straight year. Nobody has done that at DEF CON. And it became I loved them because I saw through the veneer to see what the hackers were building and who they were and how bright they were. And at that first DEF CON where I spoke, I met people from CIA and NSA. They used to have a game called Spot the Fed, where you tried to identify the Fed. Now, it's changed. It's such a multi-billion-dollar industry that the game is Spot the Hacker. If you can find a real hacker in that crowd, because it's so professionalized now. But I met some people from those agencies, and especially NSA, where information security was the sine qua non, and they wanted to know what the hackers were doing. They also wanted to know who was at DEF CON from other countries so they could keep an eye on them and find out what they were trying to learn from the hackers. There were a lot of motivations that were quite legitimate for why feds would be there, and they were there. But because of my age, 52, 53 then, and their age, about the same, we became such close friends. We became very, very, very close friends. And I escalated my game in that world. At this point, I think I've keynoted security conferences in 15 countries. I've done it in Amsterdam or the Netherlands, really, about 7 or 8 times, Australia 5 times. Great, great trips. Israel, just asked to come to Abu Dhabi next year. Japan, Dubai, New Zealand 3 times, all across Canada many times, all across the United States, and all across Europe. And so every time I went to these places, I want you to get that the ministry provides you, if you know what you're doing, with enhanced abilities in empathy, in compassion, and understanding. If you're listening to a person tell their story and you feel judgmental and you don't wind up feeling compassion, then you're not listening. No room for judgment. Nothing but compassion. Because you don't hear a single story from anybody where you can't imagine you doing exactly what they are telling you they did if you had been them and had the same inputs into their life. So you don't get to hedge and be judgmental. You don't have the right to do that. What you have the right to do is listen with compassion, understanding, empathy, and try to enhance their ability to live their own lives with greater freedom and autonomy and power. I mentioned that once to one of the NSA friends who became a very close friend, and he said, we do the same thing, but we don't do it to enhance their ability to be free and powerful. We do it to control them. And that was the overlap that later, years later, when I lost these friends, the best friends I had died. It was tragic. Some of it's sudden, and you don't remake friends like that after 20 years. And I was going to write a book about one of them. I knew enough about his work to want to do justice to it. And long before, assistant deputy director of the NSA had said to me, Richard, you can't ever discuss what we talk about. And I said, well, yeah, I understand that. He said, unless you write fiction. He said, fiction is the only way you can ever tell the truth. Well, he wasn't kidding, because you do have to protect your friends and your sources and methods. And you could probably figure out that I not only hung out with people, served as a confidant to people, served as a counselor to people, but I did some work, periodically contract work that I don't talk about because I can't. And it's not necessary for anybody to know it, what it was, what I did, and with whom. What's necessary is to know that I had insight into the nature of how the intelligence world worked. And I grasped it with the same kind of intuitive understanding that I had used all those years in ministry, on the basis, on the backbone of having studied so much literature, which is how to develop narratives and scenarios which are complex, deep, and meaningful. So I was going to write a book based on the work I knew a friend had done. And another friend said, I heard what you're thinking of. You can't do that. And I said, why? He said, because people will think what you're going to say is true, and it's dishonoring his reputation. We loved him. You can't undermine his reputation. And I said, you're absolutely right. I can't use his work or his profile or his biography as a means. But I knew I wanted to write the most real thing I could. So in ministry, what you do, it doesn't take away from the quality of the work, but what you do is learn to use a persona. You know, the Apostle Paul said, you got to be all things to all people. Well, what that means is fake it till you make it. It's really what it means. You have to know who you're talking to. And I said I did it in Hawaii and Utah and Milwaukee. Very different cultures. You have to understand the meaning and the body language and the ethos of people who don't know how to tell you themselves what it is. I mean, I hope no one's offended if I say I moved here. I'm in my 7th year here in the Twin Cities, and this is maybe the most exotic culture of all. I lived in London. I lived in Madrid. I grew up in Chicago. I lived in Utah. I lived in Hawaii. I lived in Milwaukee, and I've traveled all over the world. And to enter a Nordic culture fashioned by the ethos of Norway and Sweden, and to some extent Germany, and to some extent England, has created a distinctive culture, which it takes a while to understand and come to appreciate and even love, because there are a lot of good things going on here that you find out about when you persist and don't run scared back to wherever you came from. So understanding cultures and responding to them appropriately was part of the game, and using a persona that is a presentation, a kind of presentation that said to the person, I am what you think I am, because that's how I am giving you me. It's never the whole story, but it's good enough for me to do the work and good enough for you to buy and believe. Okay? And that reality went bingo, fused with all the work I had seen and done in the intelligence community, and I knew what I was going to write. Okay. So it poured out of me. Thank God for COVID. Nothing to do but write, right? And that's true story. The first one, I thought, I'm going to write a memoir in the form of a memoir, and it's called Mobius, a memoir. Mobius is the code name for the intelligence professional who is looking back on his life, and he loved it. He loved what he did, as we do inside the fence. He loved it because you have a get out of jail free card. You know, it's a pretty important thing to have in your pocket. There are a lot of perks that come with it, but there are a lot of costs. And Steve Miles, who wrote a book called Oath Betrayed about tortured Abu Ghraib, wrote that my Mobius books illuminate what it does to a person better than anything he has ever read, to be in the work of intelligence. And I've gotten great reviews on these. A lot of them are from people who know. In fact, all of them are from people who understand that I spoke with the voice of authenticity. The most recent communication came from a former KGB illegal. He was in this country as a Soviet spy for 10 years. Then he was arrested. Now he plays golf with the FBI guy who arrested him. But, you know, that's America for you, right? God bless America. Never spent a day in jail, did what he needed to do to stay out, and now he's a patriotic American citizen. But he wrote a wonderful paean of how he looked into the wilderness of mirrors that I had depicted. He said, this is my life. This is what it was like to be a spy. So that's what Mobius does until he gets to a point where, I don't need to give it all away, but he gets to a point where something breaks him. He has kind of a breakdown from the trauma that he is experiencing, and he becomes a whistleblower because he has to. And this goes back to my conversion experience. Once you are who you know yourself to be after a conversion, you can't go back. You can't whine that real. You are who you are. And that's why the whistleblowers that survive and persist do it for conscience. And lawyers who handle whistleblowers will tell you, you do it for revenge or money or any other reason, you'll never endure what they do to you when you blow the whistle. But if you do it because you have no choice, Drake, a famous whistleblower, said to me, he says, they took everything from me, but they didn't take myself. They can't have my soul. And that's what a real whistleblower driven by conscience possesses. That's my guy, Mobius. But it also details in depth his relationship with a woman to whom he has to present a false scenario about who he is. I'd love to tell you more about that because it's kind of fun. But I'll just tell you a story that illustrates how real that is. A fellow walked into NSA, he's a young guy, and he finally got his clearances. And took months, you know, and he came in. And that was the first time he saw and knew that his parents worked there. Now, family is supposed to be based on trust and truth, right? He never knew what his parents did because they lied to him his whole life long until he had cover inside the agency. And that is why they tell you if you're gonna get married, boy, try not to because you'll get divorced. But if you got to get married, marry someone in the agency. So at least you understand why you are who you are with each other. Because you wind up not telling the truth about hardly anything to anybody. And then you invent personas. And a friend said, guy said to me in his 50s, he said, I have been so many different people that I don't have any idea who I am anymore. That's traumatic. That's an existential crisis to have your soul eroded on that level. Why do justice to the reality of what it does? And I combine all these things. Jeff Moss, the guy from DEF CON, I have a quote from him. He said, my ability to be open-minded, conspiratorial, ethical, and subversive at the same time is inspiring, right? So I like that. But here's one from CIA, said, my words more than inspire. They teach us how to think. The reader is left reeling dizzy with insight. And a senior technical director at NSA said, the depth, complexity, and texture of Thieme's thought process breaks the mold. And there are a lot of quotes like that. So I'm honored and humbled to have great people affirm what I did. So that's Mobius' memoir. And I finished it and I said, I've got to do another book. I didn't know I was going to write a trilogy, but I got to do a life as a whistleblower. And he needs a woman. He needs a new woman. And, I loved writing Valerie. I just loved I'd never done justice to a real love story. It's not a romance. You know, there's no guy with a shirt off and, you know, on the ship, you know, and a woman with a torn bodice clinging to him. No, it's not a romance like that. But it's about what it takes for a person like that to find love. Some think they see aspects of my wife, Shirley, of 40 years, and I won't touch that one. I will just say that what Valerie does for Mobius as a whistleblower is humanize him, teach him how to act normal, because if you've been in life, you don't know, and teach him to tell the truth. And Shirley says, well, yeah, I've done all those things for you. And that's the bottom line, which is I was traumatized by this work. I did a talk called Playing Through the Pain, the dark side of security and intelligence, professional intelligence work. I wrote to colleagues and said, I'm going to address this because I've heard so many of you talk about how much pain you have been in from different things. And do you have any stories you want to share? Over 50 people from computer security, intelligence, military, and corporate sent stories. It's very powerful talk. And a friend of mine said, did you hear what was going on in the room of 1,000 while you were speaking? People were sobbing because you elicited the truth of their story so effectively. And it's on YouTube. They're on my website, themeworks.com. You have links to 50 speeches. And there are also interviews on the website about the first two Mobius books. That's either a phone or he's just sick of listening. You know. Okay, phone. There are great interviews with people from DIA and NSA and ACLU interviewing me about the books. They're really terrific. They're free. And if you want an insight into the books, that's a good place to go. And so when I finished his story as a whistleblower, I knew, you see, it's just like UFOs. Don't you see the similarity? We're obsessive. You can't put it down. You wouldn't be in this room if you could put it down. You'd be out doing something more pleasant than sitting here on a cold, dark afternoon. We can't stop. I've been doing this for 45 years, and I can't stop because I'm a need-to-know machine. I want to know. I want to seek that truth, but that truth is like the carrot after which the donkey trots. Never get there, but it keeps you moving in the direction you want to go. So in the intelligence world, Mobius wanted to get back in the game. And friends of his were doing a private business based on their work at the agency. And there were two things that they wanted to address. One is remote viewing, which is discussed in there as they train Mobius and Valerie and others to do remote viewing and what happens when you do it. It's not a nonfiction, it's fictional, but I know that the man, Hal Puthoff, who brought remote viewing from SRI to the NSA, did buy a book right away. And I told him what I tell everybody. If you like the book, tell everybody. If you don't, keep your mouth shut. Don't say, don't say a word. So one part is remote viewing, which they are trained to do. And I know a lot about it. That's all I can say is I know a lot about it compared to most lay people. And the other was UFOs. And again, after all these years, I know a lot about it compared to most people. So those two spliced together in the third book. He's invited to participate in remote viewing. And one of the things they remote view is UFOs. They detect and observe alien presence. And then the whole question becomes how good is remote viewing, how accurate, things like that. So the third book, which I never expected to write, you know, in our society, we can say, we can talk about whatever kinks we've got, right? You can describe having a piano key fetish or something, and people don't blink. You can talk about all the sexual peccadillos you want, and everybody says, oh, put it on TV, you know, be on Marv Griffin or whatever. But talk about remote viewing and psychic phenomena, talk about UFOs. Both have been so successfully debunked that you are labeled a kook. And I told you how they responded to my first talk. Now people go back to what I wrote in the 90s, and they say, my God, you saw it all from the beginning. And now they're saying about UFO, I never thought I'd live to see it. They're saying, my God, you were right there. You've been saying this for years. And then you say, okay, what's next then? Because I have. And those passions, those obsessions infuse these three books. So the fact is, I don't think OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, I don't think it's a disease. I think it's a feature because it keeps my bicycle tires spinning. So sure, we're obsessive. And I'm obsessive about what I've learned and can put together. Well, now I'm getting older, right? I mean, some would think. Going to be 80 in March, and I'm still going strong. And I have just actually started the fourth Mobius book, but then it's not a trilogy, it's a tetralogy. So I'll have to call it something else. And I'm continuing to give speeches on different subjects when I feel like it and want to and can. And I love that my brain for the moment is still going. But we know the line in Blade Runner was accurate. You built well, but not to last, just like the replicants. And I've had 4 cancer surgeries in 2 years. It wakes you up, you know, and I've lost everybody in my family. That is my mother, my father, my brother, my sister-in-law, my parents-in-law, a lot of close friends, a lot of colleagues. When you get to this age, the only reason you know you've lost a lot of people is you're still here to know that they're gone, and they don't, because they're gone. And so it's very sobering, and it deepens your appreciation for every single moment, deepens your appreciation for connecting with you. You guys, I mean, I can't tell you what a gift, right? You're attentive, you're intense, you're hungry, you want to know. You're good folks. You're probably mostly Minnesotans, right? So you're strong and stable and solid and don't quit and get the job done. So it's really a gift to be able to talk to you in this guise and have you be so attentive. And some of you, I mean, your facial expressions, body language, just keep rolling the hoops. I mean, you're just, And a speaker loves that. That's why you keep swinging back and forth in the room. And I'll tell you a secret I learned as a professional speaker. If you look over the heads of people, nobody thinks you're talking to them. But if you look right at the eyes of anybody, everybody knows you're talking to them. So you do that. You connect with people. And that's what it has been a privilege and a gift to do with you here today. And here's the pitch. As I say, if you want UFOs in government, $40 on Amazon, the best they can discount. I have a few left at 20 for you. Mobius Memoir 25. I will sell them for 20. Again, somebody told me, make everything 20. They can just hand you one bill, But if you want the whole trilogy, it's 50. It's not 60. It's not 75. It's 50. And I'll put my cards out, and you can check my website if you like. And if you have any questions based on what we've said, get in touch with me. You'll have my email address, but the main thing is ThiemeWorks, ThiemeWorks.com is the website, and it has a contact form, and it has an awful lot of stuff on it, all free, because that's the world of the internet. No paywall. And I'll put some cards down if I still have some in my pocket. And at that point, I'll ask if you have any questions. Yes, sir.
Heard of the gateway experience?
Remote
viewing.
Tell me what you mean. I don't know.
Gateway experience is pre-programming people for remote viewing. And the first thing they do is they give you a dose of LSD or PLD or both. Next step they do is you listen to Monroe tapes where they try and use brainwave entrainment to get you into the right mental frame. And then it goes on from there.
Okay, so when you say they do, you don't mean the agency does.
I'm talking about
my understanding is that CIA doesn't really have anything with the Monroe Institute. There have been some really unfortunate experiences out of the Monroe Institute, I am told, including suicide. I'm told that. I don't want to slur them. I don't know. But I stay away from that because it really was foundational for out-of-body experience. Yes.
You have a lot of experience in the intelligence community. What is your assessment of all the highly paranoid things surrounding UFOs and things like black helicopters, men in black, abductions, disappearances, assassinations, all of that stuff, that stuff that gets really into the weeds of
it does. And I don't know. I talk about how I was traumatized. I went to the ethical bioethical group at medical college in Wisconsin, try to get them to deal with torture that the CIA was doing. And that was before it was in the news. So I was talking to people who were tortured and people who had tortured others. And they didn't want to touch it. But the therapist who headed that committee said, you ought to read about trauma and what it does to people. And I said, okay. So I read a bunch of stuff she recommended. And she said, do you know why I asked? And I said, no. And she said, because you're traumatized by virtue of all the kinds of stuff and UFO stuff too. And there have been times I've come downstairs after a 4-hour conversation and my wife says, you look like you've seen a ghost. And, when I was diving on Maui and saw a shark, I'd come in and I'd say, well, sometimes you come back from a UFO interview doing the same kind of thing. So it's genuinely alarming and confrontative and scary. But there's a tremendous amount of disinformation and misinformation. And when things are held back, as they have been, then anybody can join the cottage industry called I Know the Truth, set up panels for and against, and make some money if they can, but it's not an easy way to make a living. A few people have done it. I believe that the reasons they were concerned with the security issues of UFOs were legitimate. They weren't complete. They lost hold of why they were doing it. But the ultimate truth about why they are still doing it, because despite the hearings and all the rest of the things that are on TV, more and more people know UFOs are real, but it's selectively identified as fact, and there's all kinds of debunking at the same time. And you have people like, what's his name, Sagan's successor, always saying, no, it's lightning and sprites, and he doesn't know what he's talking about. Astronomers don't know unless they've done the same kind of studies that we have done. And most of them haven't. It's not what you see through a telescope with an aperture like that. So it's gotten out of hand a little bit, but they still maintain secrecy, and they still maintain it's for good reason. And I mean, illustrative of that is the head of NASA, who used to be a senator, and he said, when I got a classified briefing on what was going on, it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Well, that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Somebody once asked me, what causes you to lose sleep? I said that I talked to a biology worker at CIA, and he says he can't sleep. I said, so the fact that he can't sleep is why I can't sleep, because he knows what can be done with bioweapons. So it's really a mixed bag. There are an awful lot of people in the intelligence community I know who are trying to do the right thing, but there's also a culture that sometimes prevents people from doing the commonsensical thing. And that's the same with the military. You know how the cultures work. So I do believe, as a friend of mine told me, I can't tell you the whole story. I don't have time, but he said when he discovered the depth of the resourcefulness applied to cover and deception in regard to UFOs, he was terrified. And he said the reason he was terrified was dedicated to keeping it undercover. And that meant layer upon layer upon layer. And normal people don't have any idea what the resources are. The army, the government can apply, and manipulation of media and so on. And so that's the point at which I say, I don't know. When he says, what's true? I don't know. I don't know. I just know a lot of it isn't true, and some of it may be true. And all good propaganda is three things. It's truths, half-truths, and lies, interwoven so that you buy the porridge and don't notice that you're eating not a raisin, but a stone. I wish I knew. And it's sexy for people, and they like to get scared, and they like to go to horror movies. I don't know, but I have a feeling it would be both more mundane and more frightening than we think. Does that make sense?
It does. Okay. I do have one more question. Do
Yeah.
you believe that, as Colonel Brush said,
Yeah.
that we have recovered alien vehicles?
I do. I believe we've recovered alien vehicles. I believe we have what they call euphemistically organics, which means some of the bodies. And I have been told incredibly credible stories. One a long time ago, and I put it on the internet when it was new, and I got a call from this. He said, "Are you out of your mind?" He says, if they read that story, they'll know it was me, and they'll know the person who told me what happened was so-and-so, and he'll be drummed out of the Air Force. And I said, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. He said, well, yeah, well, now you know it. Okay, so I wanted to use that story in the third book of Mobius. And that was 30 years ago or more. And I located him. I'm good at finding people. Called him up. He said, oh, God, you're the guy who put that on the internet. He said, well, luckily, nothing happened. And I still am in touch with that guy. He's still alive. He's retired now. But I haven't talked to him in about a year. I should check to see if he's still alive. Because if he's alive, you can't dare mention that story. So that's where I'm left. So I altered it significantly. It's not his story. But it does involve contact. Because how could there not be? Right? In 75 years. How could there not be some kind of meaningful contact? And then you get the story, Eisenhower was out of town for 2 days, so he must have been meeting at Edwards with the tall whites in the basement. And it's easy to create stories. but they usually, if they're covering something up, it's for a reason. So yeah, I'm as clear about that as anything. That I've just heard too much from too many credible people. And you want to add to that? If you worked in that, we have pieces. It's in the third book of Mobius.
Base it up by.
Yeah, yeah. But where did it go? See, the question is, we have these isolated incidents that are reported out, and then yeah, and then what?
Slow moving asteroid.
Mm-hmm.
That's when they moved the base from L5. I don't know where they went to. They moved it then.
Well, you are saying things that I know I can't evaluate because I don't know. No, I mean, I'm not saying you're not telling the truth. I'm saying I have no basis for other than that's an interesting story. All right, let's talk. Yeah, breakfast is on me, or lunch, or as much as you want to drink to loosen your tongue. Oh, okay. Anybody else? I see we've been going a long time. Pardon me? Yeah.
You might have already touched base on this. Where do you think we are going with the recent press conferences in Washington, D.C. and members of Congress getting interested in UAF? As we are getting to any definite answers to UFO phenomena?
I can ask that question too. And I do. I know people and I say, where do you think we're going with this? And you see the two strands of it. More and more people are saying things, more and more revelations are taking place, and more is hidden. In other words, the real gems of the story are still in a little case somewhere in somebody's safe. There's just a lot going on behind the scenes that we don't know. And yes, excuse me, bless you. Yeah, that's $3. You got to charge a la carte when you're out of the business, you know. Yeah, it's a great question. We're all asking that question. My cadre, the best people, better than me, what they usually, we've seen this happen so many times. These are people in their 70s and 80s who have expected disclosure or, you know, so many times. And it's always either an intentional lie or unintentional lie. It doesn't happen. It hasn't happened. So maybe this time it will happen. But, you know, we've all read Charlie Brown running up every October to kick the football, right? And she promises, this time I'm going to tell you the truth about UFOs, Charlie Brown, and hold that football and you're going to kick a three-pointer 80 yards away. And he says, great. And he comes up and he's flat on his back in pain. Well, a lot of us, I don't know. We don't know. All I can tell you is the best people I can talk to corroborate for me that my bottom line is accurate. They're here. They've been here for a long time, and they constitute a genuine security threat. The other things we know, you can't take G's like that and be human without turning into pudding. You can't accelerate like that. And the technologies have been observed so closely with sensors and radar and everything from the 40s on. We got speeches from Berlin in 50s when Werner von Braun's mentor, Hermann Oberth, said, look, this is what they do. We've got Hill's book, Unconventional Flying Objects, echoing what Hermann Oberth said about the ionization of nitrogen in the atmosphere and why the colors of observed UFOs, observed over and over and over again, go from the colors red when they're hovering and then accelerating all the way to blue and blue-white at the end when there's a powerful move. You know, we all have great stories about that, about why they can do that kind of propulsion in the air or the water, under the air, into space seamlessly that we can't do. Nobody on Earth knows how to do that. But we also know that when they're touching the water or the land, they use a different kind of propulsion and they wiggle and rock. It's been observed hundreds of times. One of the reasons they're not interested in more anecdotes, what happened in Minnesota last week, one of the reasons I don't think they're interested in, yeah, we know. We knew 75 years ago. We don't need to know that Aunt Fanny had a heart attack behind her barn. Sorry, Aunt Fanny, you must have stepped on something. They've had all that with sensors, and now we have absolute dominance of translunar, cislunar space here to the moon and the asteroids and Lagrange points, and further out than that. If you follow what is being done in space now, it's really very, very much like when we colonized the West. We're going to build habitable modules on the moon. We hope to go to Mars and do it. We hope to mine the asteroids. And we hope to find a way to propel ourselves to the nearest stars, because it looks like, how many would we got? 5,000 or more exoplanets just using our primitive methods of observation, which are primitive, but 10 years ago were unthinkable. And I haven't gone through these slides. If you want to see the slides, let me just tell you this. I did the talk, the slides are for, at DEF CON 30, and the YouTube video is there. The video is on YouTube. Just Google me. They asked me to do this. They said, will you come back, given all the falderall that's going on, will you update us on what's likely to be most accurate about what's happening now? And I think one of you said there are 54 slides, and they're all there on YouTube. I'm not going through all of them, but once you hit one, I'll tell you when to stop. Okay, stop. Those are galactic clusters. Each one of those is a galactic cluster. Our own galactic cluster is 200 light years across, right? Billions of planets, billions of planets. And that was just to try to confront people with the fact, come on, we're not, go to the next one. Okay, that's ours. It's Conolani Akea. That's our galactic cluster, 200 light years across. You see that little dot there? That's the Milky Way. In the 1950s, we didn't know that was a galaxy. We thought it was the universe. That's how slowly we accrete our understanding of the enormity and the depth and complexity of what's out there. Hit another one. Oh, that's Galileo's first telescope. Hit another one. That's the James Webb. You know what it's doing. Keep going. That's the Roman Space Telescope. That's going to detect exoplanets with greater clarity and detail. Go ahead. Hit another one. And then I start telling them the truth from the beginning. You know that one. That's McMinnville, Oregon. Two photographs. People say, how come we don't have pictures? You show them that. They say, oh, that's not real. You say, okay. The farmer lived the rest of his life unhappily. He said toward the end of his life, I wish I had never showed anybody those pictures. They were in the window in McMinnville, Oregon, and then somebody gave him the Life magazine, and the rest of his life was people accusing him of being a liar and a charlatan and a fraud for nothing. For what? He got no value out of it. And I happened to do a speech for the small funeral parlors of the country, and one was from McMinnville, and I said, oh, did you? Yeah, we buried Paul. Yeah. What did he say at the end of his life? He said the same thing he said his whole life. He said pictures are real. He wishes he'd never done it. And that's the story. Okay, another one. Those are a couple photos I show people. They say, how come we don't have pictures? Oh, we do. Go ahead. We have videos. Foo Fighters, hit another one. And then I begin with this, and I'm not going to go through all the rest of it, but the phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious. This is the 1940s. See, we knew. Hit another one. You'll see the bigger picture from him. This is what he said. Look, and he talks about characteristics, how they evade, colors, formations, and so on, acceleration. 40s. Okay, hit another one. And then we have this statement from a Major General Chief of Intelligence, the Air Force. Early 50s, credible people have seen incredible things. You probably know about the Washington, D.C. flap in 1952, and then how the Robertson panel, which met in 53, said, we can't have this. We just can't have this. And that was the beginning of official meetings, official committees, official groups, all of whom made sure they excluded meaningful data from the conversation. All right, I'm not going to go through 54 slides, but that was an attempt. And then it goes on, and it gets current, and it gets to my bugaboo, which is that humanoid sightings. I love them. because these little guys are little guys. They're 4 feet tall. They're small and they have big heads. And one of my other novels called Foam, the first part of that trilogy is called Lobes and Folds. An alien comes to this planet to do improv with humans because we're the sexiest and the funniest species they've ever found. And they have more lobes and folds in their brain. And therefore they filter out much more information about what's happening.
I saw a presentation a number of years ago about jump rooms on Earth and the Moon and Mars. So what is your belief, or what do you know about our current presence on Mars? Do you believe it's there, or what do you know about it?
No.
Okay.
Oh, we're there robotically. We're there telerobotically. I mean, no. Those are great stories. If we were there, we wouldn't be preparing to make people dead in 6 months of travel with heavy radiation. No, the best I can say is the exploration of Mars is legitimate. What we're doing on the moon it's military. See, the Space Force is no joke, and it was militarized long before Trump stood up the Space Force. One of the really solid things he did. Space is a place where it's all happening. And that's not the next frontier, it's the current.
What do you think about the story about the planet Serpo and then?
Don't know anything about it. I can hear a story and say, that's an interesting story, but there's no data that I know of. Look for the data. Yeah, there are books, but I mean data. Different, yeah.
Another question on mine. What about the claims of state-of-art technology made by Stephen Greer that we reverse engineered the old technologies in the 1950s? The claims that half the UAFs being reported in our skies are false.
I don't believe that's true. And I.
Is there any validity to what Stephen Greer is saying?
I'm not in a position to affirm or deny what Stephen Greer is saying. I can do so off camera, but I can say that 1950s. Now let's see. We got involved in Vietnam. We lost 50,000 people. We killed 1 million people. We're killing people in Gaza. Blah 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 blah. But we have this reverse engineered technology that we choose in 75 years not to use. So all I can say is that a reasonable assertion to make, do you think? We don't know how to do it. We still don't know how to do it. We're doing everything we can with material science and propulsion systems and advanced technologies, but we don't know how to replicate that, or we would. Yeah.
Is it possible that the reason a lot of this information hasn't been dispersed is that whoever's in charge thinks it's not a credible threat, given the nature of this different species?
As soon as we start to speculate, you can say that's a possibility, but it doesn't line up with all the things that I believe I have heard credibly over the years that it is a threat. And just the mere fact of it, the fact that the superiority of the technology threatens any military force that says our job is to protect the air over the United States. That was the big threat right away. Couldn't do it. The come and go. We can't stop it. And if you know military culture, that's unthinkable. You can't have that. And that's the heart and the matrix of the power structure that sustains the military as the most powerful force on Earth. And if there's something much more powerful that we can't even say what it is, that we don't know what the cultural origins or the historical origins or the motive or the purpose or the who, identity, if we can't say any of those things, that's very threatening in and of itself. And we don't want people to know we're powerless and impotent in the face of a technology that we can't explain.
So powerful, they can use that regardless of what we do. So why would they bother to use it?
Okay, and all the questions about why would they do this or why are they doing that, unanswerable. Just like I said, we don't know why a dolphin smiles. Well, they're not really smiling. But I just read a wonderful book about the sensory environments of all these different species on Earth, which are fabulous, dolphins and bats among them, but there are many, 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 including insects. And the world they experience is radically different than the world we experience. We think what we see is what there is. Not at all. You know, bees see ultraviolet, for example. Others pick up the other end of the spectrum. And then they see a world different, fundamentally different from what we inhabit. We don't know, we don't have any idea if all those big eyes are like flies' eyes or they're nocturnal or what. I don't know. I don't know the answers to any of those great questions. I really don't. And I think it's a 4:45. And I was going to quit a long time ago. Yeah. They do touch on all of that. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a book of short stories. When he said that to me, you have to write fiction. I've published 37 short stories in literary magazines, and Mind Games is the name of another $20 book. 19 of them, and they're all about deep states of consciousness accessed through alternative modalities, aliens, you know, 4 different modules of stories. You could call some of them science fiction, but some of them are based on things I've experienced that I can't say any other way. And those are in the 3rd book of Mobius too. I say it all tongue in cheek. And I say, this is just a way of saying it. But I'm trying to articulate what is so hard to articulate. Okay? Okay, if anybody wants a book, they're all $20. The whole set is 50 instead of 60 or 75. The UFO books, if I walked out here with no UFO books, I would be a happy man. Just because they're heavy. Yeah. Okay, you've been wonderful to hang in, and thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
That's going to do it for this month in our meeting. So I'll come back next month. We'll have, actually, come back next year. Don't even come back next month. Come back next year. We'll have another great meeting. Want to thank Richard again. Everybody online and here in person, let's give Richard a big round of applause. And you can see even Ivor's lined up, but those books are going fast. So take care, everybody. Have a great month. Until next time, keep your eyes in the skies, and we are out of here. Good night, everybody.
Ha